early June day, Brenda Delgado received a devastating email. It came from her ex-boyfriend, Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Brenda was 31, a student in the dental hygiene program at Sanford Brown College, a for-profit institution in Dallas. She was petite, with eyes the color of almonds and a thick mane of auburn hair that fell to her shoulders. People who knew her described her as pretty and personable. Ricky was 38, a California native and graduate of the prestigious Stanford Medical School. He had come to Dallas in 2011 to complete his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Now it was 2015, and he was working as an assistant professor at UTSW. Ricky had met Brenda in August 2012, and only 3 months after their first date, Brenda was living with him in his apartment. Except for one brief breakup, they were inseparable for 2.5 years. Ricky had gone so far as to give Brenda a promise ring. In February 2015, however, Ricky informed Brenda that he needed to move on. He began dating around and eventually found another girlfriend. The new girlfriend's name was Kendra Hatcher. She was a 35-year-old pediatric dentist who lived in Gables Park 17, one of the luxurious high-rise apartment buildings in Dallas's Uptown. She looked like a toothpaste model, with perfectly white teeth and softly waving raven hair. Throughout that summer, Ricky and Kendra dined at fashionable Uptown restaurants. They took expensive trips. On their Facebook pages, they posted photos of themselves hugging each other and smiling. They were so in love they talked about starting a wedding fund. Then, on September 2nd, the day before Kendra was to fly with Ricky to Cancun for a long weekend, someone walked up to her in the parking garage of Gables Park 17 and fired a bullet into the back of her head. Because Kendra's tan Coach purse was missing, Dallas police detectives initially speculated that she had been shot during a robbery. But within a week, the narrative took an almost unbelievable turn. The detectives believed Kendra was the victim of a murder-for-hire scheme, orchestrated by none other than Ricky's ex-girlfriend Brenda Delgado. Since the breakup, the detectives had learned Brenda had been stalking Ricky, reading his texts and emails and tailing him around Dallas. When she realized that he was falling for Kendra, she recruited 2 people she barely knew, a down-on-her-luck single mother and a small-time marijuana dealer, to kill Kendra. Maybe that way, police theorized, she could again have Ricky to herself. Members of Brenda's family, however, insisted that the police had got it all wrong. They said they could not fathom Brenda's coming up with a plan to commit any kind of crime, let alone murder. Not even Ricky could imagine that Brenda had anything to do with Kendra's murder. Since his breakup with Brenda, he said, they had remained good friends. On the very night of Kendra's murder, Ricky had texted Brenda to let her know what had happened, and she had texted him back the next morning, offering to bring over groceries or anything else he might need. Ricky told police and prosecutors he was baffled. It just didn't seem possible, he said, that someone so kind and helpful, so genuinely sweet, could transform herself almost overnight into a cold-blooded killer. When Ricky sent Brenda the email in June letting her know he had a new girlfriend, he never mentioned Kendra's name. Nor did Brenda ask any questions about her. Instead, she simply presented herself as wanting to remain friends. But alone in her apartment behind the Target, Brenda was starting to fall apart. She had devoted nearly 3 years of her life to Ricky, and now she was being replaced by an all-American beauty from a heartland town called Pleasant Plains, someone Brenda could never be. Because Kendra had an open Facebook account, Brenda was able to read all of her posts. She learned on Facebook that Ricky had gone with Kendra to California and to a resort outside Austin. Except for their visit to Mexico to meet her relatives, Ricky had never taken Brenda on any nice trips. Brenda was spiraling downward, her jealousy souring into something more obsessive, something dangerous. Brenda then turned to a friend named Jennifer Escobar, whom she had met when the 2 of them were working at the North Park Mall. Brenda knew that Jennifer was going through some hard times with her boyfriend. She expressed deep concern about Jennifer's problems and invited Jennifer to move in with her. In early August, Jennifer did move in, but she had hardly unpacked when Brenda began talking about Ricky and Kendra. She spent so much time talking about the couple that Jennifer found herself coming up with excuses to stay away from the apartment after work. Brenda offered to buy Jennifer drugs or even a car if she would help exact revenge on Ricky and Kendra. She said she wanted to use the baseball bat to knock Ricky into a coma. She wanted to kill Kendra by grabbing her from behind and stabbing her in the chest with a drug-filled hypodermic needle. A frightened Jennifer moved out of Brenda's apartment in mid-August. Brenda promptly approached one of Jennifer's friends, a 23-year-old single mother named Crystal Cortez. Crystal, who lived with her son at her grandmother's home in a low-income area of South Dallas, was struggling financially. She made $11 an hour working as a receptionist and assistant at a dental practice. Brenda started buying Crystal dinners at restaurants. Crystal listened as Brenda recounted her relationship with Ricky, then Ricky's relationship with Kendra. She said that Kendra was the reason that Ricky had stopped paying her attention and wasn't taking care of her, Crystal recalled. She said, "I'm going to eliminate Kendra. I can't deal with it anymore." Brenda offered Crystal $500 to help her carry out the killing. Crystal, who had never before been arrested, said she'd do it. For several days, Brenda and Crystal tailed Kendra around Dallas, one of them watching her through a pair of night vision binoculars that Brenda had purchased. They decided the best way to kill Kendra was to shoot her, but because neither of them had experience with guns, Brenda suggested they find a hitman. They drove around Crystal's neighborhood asking various men they saw if they would be willing to shoot someone for money. At one point, they dropped by Crystal's mother's house. A former neighbor happened to be there. He was with a friend, a small-time drug dealer named Christopher Love. Brenda and Crystal followed Christopher to his apartment, where they talked on his balcony. To impress Christopher, Brenda made up a story about having connections to a drug cartel, and she said that she would pay Christopher a combination of drugs and cash, supposedly totaling $3,000 in value, if he joined her murder-for-hire team. He quickly accepted the offer. Brenda decided to have the killing done on September 2nd, the day before Kendra and Ricky were scheduled to leave for Cancun. She borrowed a friend's silver BMW for Crystal to drive. But that morning there was a problem with the BMW's accelerator. Brenda and Crystal took the car to the auto repair shop owned by Brenda's friend Jose Ortiz, and he agreed to let them borrow his black Jeep Cherokee while he worked on the BMW. Crystal drove Brenda to a public library, where Brenda had arranged to meet a classmate and study for the upcoming state dental hygiene certification exam. A seemingly perfect alibi. Crystal then picked up Christopher. They parked across the street from Smile Zone, where Kendra worked. She finished work early that evening and drove away, followed by Crystal and Christopher. They lost her in traffic, so they drove to the parking garage of Gables Park 17 to wait. Several minutes later, Kendra arrived. Christopher, who had been huddled in the back seat, got out of the Jeep right after Kendra drove past them in the garage. He walked toward where she parked, and just as she stepped out of her car, he raised his pistol and shot her in the head. At the time the murder was taking place, Brenda was at a Chili's, having drinks with Jose. One of her classmates had given her a ride from the library to the restaurant. She and Jose returned to his house after 9. She called Crystal to confirm that the task had been completed and asked her to drive to Jose's so they could swap the Jeep for the BMW. When the police interviewed Ricky that night, he said that he had no idea who would want to kill Kendra. He certainly didn't mention Brenda as a possible suspect. Eric Barnes, a veteran Dallas police homicide detective who was in charge of the murder investigation, had only one lead: a grainy surveillance video of a woman driving a black Jeep Cherokee out of the parking garage. He decided to release the video to the news media, and Jose happened to see it. Alarmed, he called Brenda, who explained that Crystal had driven the Jeep the entire day. Brenda suggested he painted a different color. She also advised him not to tell anyone about their conversation. After talking to his family, however, Yossi met with Barnes and told him about Brenda and Christelle. The detective then quickly contacted Ricky for another talk. Barnes called Brenda, who was at the library studying again for the board exam, and sent officers to pick her up and bring her to one of the homicide division's interrogation rooms. Barnes questioned Brenda for more than 2 hours. She told him that her relationship with Ricky was not all that serious. She said wasn't particularly upset when they broke up and never learned the name of his new girlfriend, nor knew what she looked like. Barnes asked her to recount her whereabouts on the day of the murder. She never mentioned going to Jose's. She said only that her friend Crystal had dropped her off at the library that morning and had picked her up that night at Chili's. Brenda opened her wallet and pulled out a neatly folded receipt from Chili's to prove to Barnes that she could not possibly have been at Gables Park 17. At some point during the interrogation, an officer informed Barnes that Crystal had been brought in, and Barnes went to question her in another interrogation room. She acknowledged that she had driven the Jeep into the apartment garage, but she told several stories about why she was there. Eventually, Crystal said that a man named Lamar, whom she didn't know, had forced her at gunpoint to drive him into the parking garage to rob Kendra. Finally, she admitted that Brenda had paid her and Lamar to do the robbery, but she said she had no idea that Lamar was going to shoot anyone. Barnes walked back into Brenda's room, determined to get her to confess. Rather than confronting her, he decided to speak to Brenda in a gentle voice, like a father talking to his daughter who had made a mistake. "I have had my heart broken, and I know what that feels like," he told her. Brenda shook her head no, but Barnes persisted. "All this revolves around you, and it's all because of something you couldn't have," he said. "You couldn't get him back as long as she was alive." Barnes didn't take his eyes off Brenda. "I think you hated the fact that you weren't good enough for Ricky," he said. "Maybe he didn't like the way you look. Maybe he didn't want a dental hygienist anymore. He wanted a dentist." For a moment, it looked as if Brenda were going to crack, but she said nothing. Barnes realized he was going to have to let her go. Meanwhile, Barnes arrested Crystal on capital murder charges. A few days later, police learned through phone records that Crystal had been texting a Christopher Love in the days leading up to Kendra's murder. They searched his car, found the Smith & Wesson behind the glove compartment, and had him arrested. Then they went looking for Brenda to arrest her. But she had already boarded a bus to Mexico. For 6 months, she lived quietly with relatives in a town in north-central Mexico, doing nothing that would bring attention to herself. When the FBI, working with Mexican authorities, found her, she surrendered peacefully. Kevin Brooks, the lead prosecutor on the case for the Dallas District Attorney's Office, knew he did not have the strongest case to put Brenda away. Brooks met with Crystal and offered her a 35-year sentence in return for her testimony about the roles she, Brenda, and Christopher had played in Kendra's murder. Crystal spoke to her attorney, who said she could be paroled in 15 years, and agreed to the deal. Brooks tried Christopher first in October 2018. Relying on Crystal's testimony, jurors took 2 hours to find him guilty, and they voted to sentence him to death by lethal injection. It took jurors only 20 minutes to return a guilty verdict for capital murder, and the judge sentenced Brenda to life in prison without parole.